Tonight my wife walked out because I was broke. She kissed our 5-year-old on the forehead, dropped divorce papers on my chest, and climbed into a black Escalade that wasn't mine. I drove back to my Houston shop, rain drumming the tin roof like a gavel, and opened an envelope from a law firm. Inside, an inheritance I never saw coming. $500 million. One catch: keep it secret for 12 months or lose it. So I kept my head down, raised my boy, and built in silence. 5 years later, I'm not the man she left. I'm the man I promised my son I'd be. As floodlights wash over our gate in the woodlands, a taxi idles. She steps out, makeup streaked, suitcase rattling like guilt, and begs to come home for our son's sake. Money measures what you have. Character measures who you are. The gate hums, locked between us. I'm Jack Lawson. Would you open it? Yes or no? My name is Jack Lawson. I fix what other folks give up on. Old trucks with stubborn rattles, lawnmower engines that cough more than they cut, family cars that smell like crayons and fast food. I'm not a guru. I'm a mechanic on Houston's east side who learned to stretch a dollar until it squeaks. I grew up believing simple rules. Show up early, pay what you owe, keep your word. I married young, became a dad, and told myself that work could outlast any storm. Oil under your nails isn't shame where I'm from. It's proof you're useful. My shop sits under a tin roof that chatters when the rain blows in off the Gulf. I've never owned a suit that fit right, but I can tune an engine by ear. For 20 years, I believed sweat could hold a home together. That's what I told myself every time I locked the bay door at midnight, until the night the rain tested every rule I lived by. Lawson Auto isn't pretty. Fluorescent lights buzz like mosquitoes. Fans push thick summer air across cracked concrete. Saturdays smell like gasoline and barbecue smoke drifting from a food truck down the block. Guys swing by with busted Chevys, trade jokes, and sometimes pay me with pecan pie when cash runs short. One old-timer brings his F-150 and reminds me not to chase shiny tools I don't need. He says a good wrench and a clear head beat plastic promises. That shop raised my boy, Noah. He learned colors off oil stains: amber, jet, rust. When you're a man past 30 and the bills stack up like brake rotors, honest work is a religion. You clock in, clock out, try to keep the wolf off the porch. I believed fixing engines could fix the rest: marriage, money, pride. I told myself if I could squeeze one more mile out of a tired truck, I could squeeze one more week of peace at home. I was wrong. Amber was beautiful in a way that made rooms adjust. She didn't marry a dreamer. She married a man who brought home sore shoulders and grocery store flowers. At first she said she loved that I worked with my hands. Later the smell of grease became proof I'd settled. Money talks, she said, and ours whispered. She scrolled past rooftop parties and diamond bracelets on her phone, and I watched her eyes follow a life I couldn't afford. I tried to show her value that doesn't flash: discount tires for a widow, a free alternator for a single mom. But you can't tape over a crack that runs through a person's idea of enough. I told her we were close, that one good month could turn it all. She said youth doesn't wait for close. The worst part is I didn't hear the door creaking inside my own house. I was too busy telling myself love is patient, while the person I loved ran out of patience. Our son, Noah, made the chaos quiet. 5 years old, hair like he'd wrestled a balloon, pajama top with a faded Superman logo that wouldn't wash out. He'd follow me into the garage on tiptoes, dragging a step stool like a loyal dog. He called my ratchet a lightning stick, believed every problem had a click, click, click to it if you listened right. We'd eat grilled cheese at the workbench, and he'd ask the kind of questions only kids ask. Do engines get lonely? I told him the truth men my age understand. Machines don't care, but people do. For men between 30 and 60, there's a moment when your back hurts, your eyes sting, and you realize what you're building isn't a business. It's a boy who's learning what a father looks like. That was my pride. That was my quiet. And that night, when the storm pinned our city to the ground, he looked at me and asked a question I wasn't ready to answer. You ever sit at a table and feel winter in July? That was our kitchen. 2 plates, 1 conversation we kept skipping. The mortgage company had a personal relationship with my voicemail. The electric bill sent little love letters with red ink. I clipped coupons, bought generic, pretended day-old bread tastes the same if you toast it twice. Amber tapped her fork against china like a metronome counting down to something. We ate in the kind of silence older men know too well, the kind that grows moss on a marriage. I told one story about a customer who fixed his truck just to take his granddaughter fishing. She didn't smile. When you're a working man, you can survive noise. It's the quiet that breaks you. I stacked the plates, rinsed the pan, and told myself to get another overtime shift, sell a spare compressor, make it work. Then my phone lit the room with a message that felt colder than the fridge. I started saying yes to everything. Late-night brake jobs, Sunday alternators, mobile calls in parking lots, coffee after coffee, back tight as a lug nut, hands cracked like dry earth. I missed a parent-teacher night and told myself Noah would understand. Men my age live on, I'll make it up to you. I kept a tally of little guilts and promised a big clean slate later. The ledger doesn't balance. You trade birthdays for receipts and call it love. Amber watched me hustle like a man trying to outrun a shadow. She wasn't impressed. Effort doesn't pay the card, she said, waving a bill thick enough to be a paperback. I kissed Noah's head as he slept and swore the grind would break through any minute. There's always a next month in a working man's pocket, right up until there isn't. That night, the rain started like someone dragging chains across the roof, and my phone buzzed with 4 words that gut a house. Every man knows that text lands like a wrench on tile. I drove home slow, wipers scraping, traffic lights smearing into red rivers on the windshield. Our house glowed too bright, every lamp blazing like an interrogation room. Amber stood in the living room in a green dress that looked expensive and felt like armor. She didn't sit. The envelope in her hand had weight. You can tell when paper has a job to do. I was still dripping when she said it. She didn't marry me to be poor. She wasn't surrendering her 20s and 30s to overdue notices. The words were clean, practiced, like she'd said them in a mirror. I reached for workbench dreams, expansion plans, loyalty punch cards, anything. But they sounded small in that room. A thunderclap shook the windows. She didn't flinch. She set the envelope on my chest like a verdict and asked me to sign. My mouth wouldn't work. My heart did. It fell through the floor. Divorce paperwork is just paper until the person you love makes it a blade. The pages slid across our coffee table, stiff and official, asking me to legalize a failure I hadn't admitted. Amber's voice didn't crack. Mine did. I tried to talk about 12-hour days and how close we were to turning a corner, about the customers who trusted us, about Noah asleep down the hall. She didn't want a story. She wanted a signature. I stared at the lines where my name should go and felt my hands forget their strength. You can lift an engine block and still be too weak to hold a home. When she turned to pack a suitcase, drawers slammed like gunshots. I wanted to argue, to bargain, to buy time we didn't have with money we didn't own. Instead, I stood there soaking the rug. The storm outside sounded almost kind compared to the weather in her eyes. Then her heels started toward the door. I didn't hear Noah get out of bed. I felt him, the way a father feels a presence that needs him. He shuffled down the hallway, feet silent, bare under his arm, the big S on his pajama top sagging at the collar. "Mommy, where are you going?" Those words can break a rib you didn't know you had. Amber knelt, smoothed his hair, and told him to be good for Daddy. She said she needed a different life, like we were a jacket that didn't fit. Noah didn't understand futures or finances. He understood people who stayed and people who didn't. He grabbed the hem of her dress the way a drowning kid grabs the side of a pool. For a heartbeat, I thought she'd look back at us and remember. She stood instead. I picked him up and felt his small chest jump against mine. When a child cries into your collarbone, the sound goes straight through you. Headlights washed the room white. A black Escalade idled at the curb, engine purring like money. The back door opened with that soft, smug click luxury cars have, the one you feel in your teeth. Amber didn't look back. She rolled her suitcase through puddles and climbed in like she'd rehearsed it. The door shut. The taillights smeared across wet pavement and disappeared. I stood in the doorway, bare feet on cold tile, Noah's fingers buried in my shirt like he could anchor both of us. The storm kept talking. Inside, the house learned a new kind of quiet, the kind where the clock gets loud and every hallway feels longer. Papers lay scattered on the floor like white flags I refused to wave. I carried Noah to the couch and held him until his breathing slowed. If you've ever been left, you know the moment after the door clicks is the deepest dark. That's when you count what's gone. That night I counted everything and came up empty. I tucked Noah in, sat at the kitchen table, and listened to the roof drip into a saucepan I'd slid under a leak. There's a sound older men know, the plink, plink, plink of a slow loss you can't stop. I stared at the divorce papers curling at the corners where the rain had kissed them. I wasn't angry, I was hollow. I told my son the only promise I could keep. You'll never go to sleep wondering if you're loved. I meant it with everything I had left. The house smelled like motor oil and cinnamon from a roll I'd burned that morning trying to be festive. I thought that was my night. A man, a boy, a storm, a stack of endings. Then I noticed another envelope on the table, white, heavy, stamped from a law firm downtown I'd never hired. It had waited while my life cracked in half. The rain got louder. My hands did too. I reached for it, not ready for what waited. The envelope sat where the rain could find it, white, heavy, edges swollen, Caldwell in green embossed like it belonged to a richer man's table. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and felt the paper's weight the way you feel a socket click into place. Lawyers don't write to mechanics unless something's broken or buried. I pressed my thumb over the raised seal and thought of overdue notices, of Noah asleep under a thin blanket, of the sound a house makes when a promise cracks. Older men know that sound. It's the same hush after a doctor clears his throat, the same hush after a boss says, "Close the door." My name sat clean in black ink. Jack Lawson. No mistake there. The storm popped and hissed above the tin roof. In the bay, a Chevy ticked as it cooled, each click a small clock. I broke the seal and slid the papers free, not ready for what numbers can do to a life. Uncle Hank never did birthdays with bows. He sent greasy postcards from West Texas and once slipped me a pocket knife saying, "A tool is a truth." The letter said he was gone, quietly, 3 weeks back. Then the figures arrived like a siren. Oil royalties, land, funds stacked like freight on a train, total value $500,000. I counted zeros like a man counts breaths after bad news. I folded and unfolded the page until the crease felt permanent. 500 million is not a sum, it's a shift in gravity. In my head I saw Noah's lunchbox, the leaking roof, the stack of bills with red ink, then Hank at a pump jack grinning into the sun. If this was a joke, it was cruel. If it was real, it was heavier than any engine I'd ever lifted. The signature lines didn't blink. They stared back steady. The number didn't solve my night. It changed my morning and demanded an answer I didn't yet have. The next page didn't brag. It warned. Confidential for 12 months, the clause read. Any disclosure before term voids bequest. In plain talk, tell no one for a year or lose it. Not my neighbors, not my crew, not my son. The lawyer's voice on the phone was calm, the way a good nurse is calm. No rush, no drama. Mr. Lawson, your uncle believed sudden wealth tests a man's spine. I stared at my Ford keys and understood the test wasn't numbers. It was noise. Could I keep living like a broke father while $500 million stared from a drawer? Men my age know this drill. Bite your tongue, do the job, wait out the storm. But storms talk. They pound the roof and ask who you are under pressure. 12 months of silence felt longer than any winter I'd known. I looked down the hall where Noah slept and realized the question wasn't, can I be quiet? It was, who am I quiet for? Tucked behind the legalese was a smaller sheet, torn from a yellow pad. Hank's handwriting leaned forward like a man about to make a point. Money is a loud friend and a cruel master. Don't chase the ones who leave you. Choose your son. H. Simple. No sermon. No map. Just a compass shoved into my palm. I saw him again on a porch in Odessa, boots up, telling me a rig will show you a man's patience, and a boy will show you his heart. The note made the will feel less like a windfall and more like a charge handed down. I could picture all the wrong doors sudden money opens, loud trucks, loud bars, louder lies. That wasn't my boy's future. I pressed the note flat with my grease-stained fingers and felt something old settle in my chest, something steadier than fear. The lawyers had terms. Hank had truth. The rain softened on the roof, like it was waiting for my answer. Here's the part people don't put on billboards. The loneliest room you'll ever sit in is the one where you get good news and no one to tell. I poured cold coffee and stared at numbers that could move mountains and couldn't warm a chair. Older men will get this. Promotions feel thin if there's no one at the table to pass the peas. I thought about calling someone from church, a buddy from the parts store, even my old baseball coach, just to hear a human yes. The claws closed my mouth. The house hummed like a fridge at midnight. $500 million doesn't fix a boy's empty doorway. It doesn't put a mother back in his bedtime. It does, however, hand you a mirror. Who are you when no one's clapping? My hands still smelled like motor oil. My shirt still stuck to the small of my back. Rich on paper, poor in noise, I folded the will and picked up the only truth I trusted. Tomorrow starts at dawn. I wrote rules on a receipt. No new truck, no shiny watch, no loud moves. Pay what's owed. Protect what matters. Build slow. If Hank's money was a test, I'd pass it like any hard job, one bolt at a time. I tucked the will into a metal lockbox and slid it behind a box of brake pads. Then I checked on Noah. He'd kicked off his blanket as usual. I pulled it over his shoulders and whispered what the note already knew. I choose you. Men between 30 and 60 don't need speeches. We need plans. Mine started small. Keep the shop running, keep the lights on, keep the boy steady. I knew I'd need smart help without drawing a crowd, but that could wait until morning. The roof still leaked. The bills still stared. But something in me had squared up. The storm eased to a hush, and the clock rolled past 2. At first light, I'd begin the quiet work of becoming the father my son deserved. Dawn came like it always does. Coffee burnt a little, radio low, bay doors grinding open. I swept the floor, counted filters, and told myself to be ordinary. $500 million slept in a lockbox behind brake pads, but I wore the same faded work shirt with my name stitched crooked. A man my age knows how to blend in. Park the old Ford where you always park it, complain about parts delays, nod at the mailman. I changed oil, rotated tires, and pretended the future wasn't whistling through the cracks. Customers asked about Amber without asking. I shrugged and said, "We're managing." I was. I managed every word, every receipt, every look. The trick to carrying a secret that big is to move like you're empty-handed. By noon, the shop smelled like warm rubber and black coffee. By 6, my knuckles were raw and my voice was steady. Ordinary held, but ordinary won't build what a boy needs. I locked the bay and dialed a number. Raymond Pierce met me at a diner off I-45, the kind of place where the waitress calls you hun and the coffee never hits empty. He had banker hands and a quiet tie. We slid into a back booth between ketchup bottles and sugar packets. "No headlines," I said. "Just structure." He nodded like he'd been born agreeing. We formed Miller Holdings LLC, boring on purpose. P.O. box downtown, clean books, layers that looked like common sense to anyone snooping. Raymond spoke in calm steps, holding accounts, vendor shells, management fees that made the money move without making noise. "First rule," he said, "we don't talk. Second rule, we don't flash." I signed where he pointed, feeling more like I was tightening a timing chain than joining the rich. He slid me a folder thick with instructions and a pen that felt heavier than it looked. The waitress refilled my cup and asked about Noah. "He's good," I said. "He would be, if I did this right. You don't pay a bonfire with a bucket. You smother it, little by little." I set automatic payments that didn't wink at anyone watching. Mortgage caught up, then current. Credit cards eased to 0 like landing a plane. The collections calls went from daily to none, a silence so sweet I almost missed the adrenaline. I left the Ford as it was, dings and all. No new toolbox, no big screen, no steakhouse selfies. The men I know respect quiet victories. The light bill paid before the due date, the fridge full without coupons, the feeling when you answer a number you used to dodge. I even fixed the drip under the sink because small leaks tell big stories. Raymond sent a text. "Clean slate achieved." I stood in my kitchen with a stack of receipts and a heart that finally hit idle. Debt had been a second boss. I'd just fired him. But freedom without purpose turns reckless. I folded the receipts. Next line item. My boy. I handled Noah's tuition the way you fix a squeak. Quietly. With the right oil. The school secretary smiled like she'd seen a ghost get laid to rest. No backstory, no confetti, just checks that cleared. I booked counseling too. Called them special talks to help him feel strong. He came home with a paper crown and a note from his teacher. Kind, focused, loves cars. I stuck it to the fridge like a diploma. At drop-off, I tied his shoe and slipped a message in his lunchbox. You are loved, no matter what. It felt corny in my hands and perfect in his. Older dads will get this. Providing is louder when it's quiet. On the drive to the shop, Noah asked if engines dream. They don't, I said, but drivers do. He nodded like that settled something. I parked, watched him wave through the window, and realized every payment was a promise with proof. I turned the key in the bay door. Time to build more proof. That night we rebuilt his toy car on the workbench. A tiny axle, a stubborn wheel, a laugh that filled the cold places. He dragged his step stool beside me like always, called the ratchet a lightning stick, and counted clicks out loud. I showed him how to line up grooves by feel, not by guess, the same way Uncle Hank taught me on a pump jack under a brutal sun. The wheel snapped into place, we set it down, and the little car rolled true across the scarred wood. Noah whooped like we'd launched a rocket. I didn't tell him some wins are small on purpose. I just took the victory like medicine. We ate grilled cheese and watched the ceiling fan wobble. He fell asleep with 2 greasy fingerprints on his cheek and my old shop rag under his chin. I carried him to bed and stood there longer than I needed to. A father finds his fuel where he can. Mine was sleeping. The night asked for more. In our neighborhood, pity wears a friendly face. Guys clapped my shoulder and said, "Hang in there." One neighbor offered a used lawnmower he didn't need. The parts rep gave me a discount and a wink. People love a comeback story, but they love you small until you prove them wrong. I let them. I nodded, said thank you, and kept my head down. The Ford coughed the same in the morning. My boots squeaked the same on wet concrete. I told myself invisibility was cover. Older men know the value of working without an audience. Nobody heckles the man they think is losing. Meanwhile, the shop stayed busy, and my hands stayed honest. I caught my reflection in the bay window, tired but steady, the kind of man folks forget until they need him. That's fine. Being underestimated is cheaper than camouflage and harder to question, but even shadows grow footprints. Word of mouth was spreading. So were my plans. I circled a property listing. Pasadena. Raymond built the channels. I learned the tide. Nights, I sat with spreadsheets until numbers started sounding like engine notes. Nothing flashy. Logistics software, maintenance suppliers, a bond ladder you could set a coffee cup on. We placed capital where boredom protects it. The first dividend hit like an unseen tailwind, small but steady, proof the river was running. I wired funds between accounts with names so dull they'd cure insomnia and watched our runway grow. Meanwhile, I still scraped gaskets and answered phones by first name. Strangers judge success by what they can count. Men my age judge it by what they can keep. I kept quiet, kept receipts, kept the locks changed. Then an email from a broker slid in. A shuttered garage off Spencer Highway, Pasadena. 2 lifts, good bones, owner tired. Needs a believer, he wrote. That I could be. I closed my laptop, stared at Noah's crayon drawing on the fridge, 2 stick figures, 1 small, and felt the river point east. We closed through Miller Holdings, paperwork plain as toast. I walked that old garage in Pasadena with a flashlight and a bucket of paint, listened to the echoes under the roofline, and heard a future whisper. We scrubbed floors until concrete looked new, added 2 lifts, replaced a compressor that screamed like a kettle. I hired 2 mechanics who'd been chewed up by bad shops, one with a bum knee, one with a record and a work ethic that could crack concrete. We opened on a Tuesday. By Friday, the parking lot looked like a family reunion of tired trucks. My crew asked how I pulled it off. Small loan, I said, and they nodded like that made sense. I printed paychecks that didn't insult a man's rent. The register pinged, the phone rang, and hope smelled like hot breaks and fresh coffee. 1 shop makes a living. 2 shops make a plan. I wiped my hands, called Raymond, and circled Baytown on the map. You want to see a grown man blink back tears? Hand him a pay stub that finally respects his back. I raised base pay, paid overtime like it counted, and started profit sharing that arrived before excuses. The shop mood changed. Guys cleaned their bays before I asked. Break room talk softened, less griping, more bragging about kids' field trips and braces. An older tech bought his wife a new washing machine and looked 10 years lighter. December came and I printed bonuses early. We didn't do speeches. We shook hands and stood around a box of donuts like it was a trophy. Men between 30 and 60 don't need fireworks. We need fairness. Word spread the way good news does, through cousins and cousins' cousins. Applications stacked up. I kept my name off billboards and let dignity do the marketing. Still, giving your people a ladder raises the house you're standing in, and higher houses cast longer shadows. I checked the gates twice. Growth invites visitors. The first check said legal retainer. The second said rent relief. I built the Miller Foundation for single fathers without ribbon cuttings, just envelopes that arrived when panic did. We covered filing fees for custody, bought car seats at midnight, paid a week at a motel so a dad could keep his kids safe. I sat in my office after hours and read thank you emails that sounded like men learning to breathe. No press, no plaques, just mercy moving like a ghost through the city. At church, a guy shook my hand and said a miracle had shown up on his doorstep. I nodded and asked about his boys' baseball team. Older men understand. If a good deed needs clapping, it's not done yet. The accounts balanced. The stories didn't. They grew. I kept the foundation behind the same dull names Raymond loved. The point wasn't credit. It was cover. Because generosity has fingerprints, and fingerprints lead doors to knock. That night, my phone buzzed after midnight. The shop slept. The neighborhood, too. I stood in the kitchen with the fridge humming and the clock counting slow. Sometimes wealth is loud in your head. What ifs, why nots, just thens. I went to Noah's room and found him sideways in bed, blanket lost, hair wild. I tucked him in and lay on the floor beside him, shoulder against the frame, the way a guard dog settles by a gate. "You will never be alone," I whispered, the same words I said the night Amber left, only stronger now. Men my age keep their promises in plain language because life already complicates enough. Tomorrow would be payroll, parts orders, and a meeting about Baytown. It would also be second-grade show and tell. I penciled it on a sticky note. Be there. My phone glowed on the dresser. 2 missed calls from an unknown number, 1 voicemail with no words, just breathing. Growth draws eyes. I stared at the ceiling fan shadow and knew the next test was coming. I didn't know it then, standing in my kitchen listening to a silent voicemail, but 1,500 miles away in Los Angeles, Amber was learning a different forecast. Trent Carter's penthouse sat in the clouds, all glass and promise. Rooftop parties, heat lamps, a DJ, and views that make people forget rent is due. She loved that height. It looked like control. Waiters hovered. A black Escalade ferried them past velvet ropes, doors shutting with that rich, padded click. Trent wore a navy suit with thread that caught the light, smiled like problems were beneath his floor. He poured champagne and talked about towers, projects, partners. The room nodded. The music wrapped everything in gold. I've been in loud rooms. The noise can hide the bill. That night the pool glowed turquoise, and Amber posted a toast to finally living. Elevators are honest. They go up until they don't. Under the bass, a quieter instrument started playing, the meter that counts what borrowed joy costs. Later, when I finally scrolled, I saw what the world saw. Amber drinks, Amber City, Amber's smile, sunsets filtered to perfection, captions that promised up and up. Men my age can tell cash from credit by how a hand folds a receipt. Instagram can lacquer over late fees. It can't mute them. There were borrowed diamonds with weekend sparkle, yachts with names that sounded like victory laps, breakfasts that cost what my first toolbox did. I didn't feel bitterness. I felt the ache of a truth older adults know. Some folks live in the highlight reel and confuse it with the game. In one clip, Trent taps his card without looking. That's not confidence. That's practice. The comments said goals. The bank says balance. Somewhere off camera, a statement printer warmed up. Somewhere a due date circled back like a homing bird. You can pose with a skyline, but you can't post your way past interest. Hearts clicked. The meter kept counting. So did time. Leverage is a polite word for borrowed time. Trent's empire, I'd learned, ran on stacks of loans, construction lines, bridge loans, mezzanine debt, all leaning on tomorrow like tomorrow can't limp. On paper, it looked like momentum. In real life, it sounded like vendors waiting by silent phones. Older men know this math. If the cash flow coughs, the whole engine stalls. The first cough is subtle, a banker asking for updated statements, a covenant test that suddenly matters. Then come auditors, then lawyers, then the smile that says, let's circle back, when what they mean is, we're circling in. Amber didn't read term sheets. She read views. She heard equity event soon and pictured fireworks. The numbers didn't care about fireworks. They care about Tuesdays. One missed payment begets another. The gap widens. Pride calls it a dip. Debt calls it dinner. Somewhere in a conference room, a spreadsheet stopped agreeing with the story. When the math changes teams, charm can't coach it back. Denial has a beautiful voice in a loud room. Amber had friends who ordered for the table and opinions that came with the bottle. Paper losses, they said. Bridge the gap. Optics matter more than margins. That's advice people give with other people's money. An email flagged past due got laughed off. Trent has people, she said, like the very phrase could pay a bill. Men my age hear that and know what it means. No one is steering. The party got a little brighter, the music a little louder. She posted another rooftop sunset, chin lifted like the wind owed her respect. It's human to want the room to stay warm. It's human to clap while the song still plays. But the tab was walking toward the table in a black folder. The DJ dropped a beat. The elevator hummed. Somewhere, a signature line waited for ink and blood. Denial dances late. The song, however, is on the venue's clock. Warnings don't always shout. Sometimes they clear their throat at 7:13 a.m. A banker called and asked to discuss exposure. The jeweler who once poured champagne slid a balance sheet across glass and said, "We'll need to settle before Friday." The concierge's smile cooled. The valet asked for a ticket and got a lecture. The tow truck didn't argue. It hooked the Escalade and left. Neighbors who used to raise glasses raised eyebrows and looked at their shoes. Doors that had opened by face now required codes. Amber was still beautiful, still carried herself like gravity was optional, but gravity doesn't sign NDAs. The apartment echoed in a new way. Same square footage, different temperature. She dialed friends. Voicemail answered with cheerful lies. She tried Trent. He texted a time, then pushed it back. The city glittered outside, patient as a shark. She pressed her palm to the window and felt nothing. The meter ticked. Even the ice machine sounded like a countdown. Then the letter came. Legal paper, rich ink, language that says everything without admitting anything. Review. Remit. Vacate. The elevator fob blinked red once before it blinked green, the kind of stutter a building has when it's thinking about you. Trent spent more hours behind doors with men who love words like liquidity. He said it was a storm, not a season. Storms can be the whole season. Amber stuffed gowns into garment bags and told herself she was organizing. She wasn't. She was practicing leaving. The penthouse felt like a stage after the show. Sticky floor, chairs stacked, a quiet that's louder than the band. Somewhere below, a printer spat out another notice. Somewhere above, a drone filmed another sunset for someone else's highlight reel. She stood on the balcony and tasted metal in the wind. The first crack isn't always a bang. Sometimes it's a soft shift under perfect tile. The glass still held, but the ground didn't. The fall had already begun. Baytown smelled like salt and hot steel the morning I walked the fence line of a shuttered garage off Garth Road. 2 lifts, 1 good office chair, a soda machine that ate quarters. Good bones under the dust. We closed through Miller Holdings LLC with paperwork so boring it was camouflage. I hauled in a pressure washer, rolled paint on cinder block, and tuned the airlines until they breathed right. By noon, a father and son limped in with a Silverado that coughed like a smoker. We fixed it for less than the dealer's diagnostic. Word spread before the paint dried. I hired a veteran with a wrench tattoo and a kid hungry to learn. We opened on a Wednesday. By Friday, the lot looked like a reunion of hard miles. Contractor vans, shrimp boats pickups, grandma sedans. 1 shop feeds a family. 2 shops build a backbone. I locked up, pocketed the keys, and felt the weight change. Growth is a promise. and a target. You don't have to give speeches when you give respect in dollars. Base pay went up, overtime counted, profit sharing showed up early, not when the numbers settle. The break room got quieter in a good way, less griping, more talk about braces, Little League, and someone's wife finally getting a night off. Luis, an older tech with a knee that clicks, held his check like a man holds a new grandson. "Feels like somebody sees us," he said. We ordered kolaches and laughed like payday meant more than catching up. It did. Men between 30 and 60 don't need a parade. We need a fair shake and time to make it home for dinner. Productivity didn't tick up. It leapt. Bays got cleaned before I asked. Comebacks went down. Customers started bringing neighbors. I kept my name off billboards and let dignity do the marketing. But the brighter you make a room, the more it shows in the street outside. I checked the locks twice. At night, I signed checks under a cheap desk lamp and wrote, "From the Miller Foundation for Single Fathers," in the memo line no one would read. We covered a week of motel rooms for a dad whose landlord changed the locks. We paid filing fees so another man could keep Friday nights with his girl. No ribbon cuttings, no photo ops, just envelopes that arrived before panic did. On Sundays, a deacon shook my hand and said, "A miracle came through." I asked about his back and nodded at the choir. Older men know this. If you need applause, you built it for the wrong reason. Still, mercy leaves footprints. A school counselor whispered about an anonymous donor. A lawyer at the clinic smiled too long. The city started to hum with stories that almost had my name in them. I told Raymond to triple-check our layers. He said we were fine. I believed him, mostly. Generosity feels best when it's quiet. It also carries far. Not all bets need neon. I found a scrappy auto tech team in a converted warehouse near the ship channel. Hoodies, coffee, whiteboards full of arrows. They weren't building an app to rate donuts. They were building predictive maintenance for fleets. When to pull a truck before it dies on I-10. How to swap a $90 sensor instead of a $9,000 transmission. That speaks fluent mechanic. I listened to their demo like I listened to an engine. Tone, heat, vibration. It sounded honest. We took a quiet slice through Miller Holdings. No chest beating, no strategic partner press release. I told them I'm a shop guy who respects uptime and hates waste. They laughed and slid me a cap with their logo. That night I lay awake hearing possibilities click in sequence. Shop margins, supplier leverage, training curriculum that trains to tomorrow, not yesterday. Bets like this don't go viral, they go vital. If it works, the city runs smoother. If it fails, I own it. Either way, my name stays off it. Months later, Raymond slid a manila folder across my desk. The startup had landed a national contract with a shipping giant, the kind of logo you see on boxes at Christmas. Revenue charts turned into stairs. The words S1 draft showed up like a sunrise. IPO incoming. My small slice looked bigger in the reflection of a glass door. I didn't buy a watch. I bought 2 new lifts and a used scan tool we actually needed. At the shop, a kid handed me a crayon drawing of his dad under a car with a smile as wide as the bay. That's a return you can't chart. Still, success has a radio frequency. Bankers called friendlier, vendors called faster. Invitations arrived with embossed seals. "Round table on Houston's future," one read. I wiped grease on my jeans and tossed it in a drawer. The best future I know waits at the dinner table, but you can hear a story getting louder even when you won't turn it up. The first article came from a local business journal. Anonymous investor reshapes blue-collar Houston. Good photos, no names, a guess about industrial roll-ups that made Raymond smirk. Then a national magazine ran a piece about the quiet billionaire myth. I stepped out of the bay to 4 voicemails from reporters who pronounced my last name like a question. A councilman's office invited me to a luncheon where they spell your name on a tent card. I sent a thank you and stayed at work. Men my age have a reflex for hype. We duck. But even a man who ducks has a shadow. I told my crew to keep their heads down and their work clean. We tightened our vendor circle and changed how we signed for deliveries. A journalist parked across the street pretending to scroll. He never looked at the oil on my boots. That's the point. You can hide in plain sight until someone decides plain sight is the story. I still drive the old Ford with the stubborn wipers and seat foam that remembers me. My shirts still have Jack stitched crooked above a pocket full of Sharpies and receipts. Grease on your cuff keeps your feet on the ground. It also disarms people who sniff for money. At the grocery store, a retiree nodded at my hands and said, "Working man." That felt better than any headline. Noah thinks the truck is a dinosaur we coax through mornings. He doesn't care what a share price did at noon. He cares if I make his game on Saturday. That's the math I answer to. Still, silence takes work. You have to ignore the itch to correct a rumor, to claim credit when someone else takes it, to puff your chest when a banker squints at your boots. I button my collar, turn off the radio, and choose quiet again. Choice by choice, day by day. Then the shop phone rang with a question I couldn't dodge. A reporter asked for 5 minutes on background. I said no, politely. He paused, then said he'd already spoken to a source who'd seen filings tied to Miller Holdings. My jaw went still. That night, a black SUV idled across from Baytown longer than traffic makes sense, windows dark as secrets. A man stepped out, snapped 2 photos, stepped back in. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. Raymond texted, "We're clean, don't flinch." I didn't, out loud. Inside, the old roof leak feeling started up. Plink, plink, plink. Quiet built this. Quiet protected my boy. But pressure turns volume knobs you don't control. I stood in the doorway, watching my crew wipe down tools, listening to the radio fade to static. A gust rattled the bay door like a warning. I locked up, drove the long way home, and saw my porch light spill across the walk. Noah's shadow moved behind the blinds. I gripped the wheel and asked the only question that mattered. Can silence keep us safe? One more day. The day after that reporter call, I sat in a crowded courthouse hallway to watch a pro bono clinic my foundation quietly funded. That's where I saw Sarah Whitaker, sleeves rolled, hair escaping the kind of bun you make when the work matters more than mirrors. She wasn't flashy, she was steady. She spoke for a father who'd missed a shift to protect his son, and the judge actually leaned in. No theatrics, just plain words that landed like tools placed in the right tray. Older men will know the feeling, when somebody in a messy world sounds clean. After, we stood near a vending machine that ate my dollar. She laughed, hit the return lever, and my change spilled like a small miracle. We talked about work. I said I ran a few shops. She said, "Honest work is underrated. No perfume speech, no networking grin, just a woman who saw sweat and called it noble." I asked if she'd ever changed a tire. She said, "Teach me." We met for coffee at a diner that knows my order. She asked about the shop, not the rumors. I told her about Baytown, about paychecks that land like respect, about the dads we help without microphones. She told me why she chose law, an uncle who raised her when he didn't have to, a belief that paperwork can be mercy if the right hands file it. We swapped stories like old neighbors over a fence, no rush, no spotlight. She didn't flinch when I smelled like oil and rain. "You look tired," she said, "but not beaten." Men my age hear the difference. Tired is a season, beaten is a verdict. I paid the bill in cash, habit I couldn't shake. In the parking lot, she pointed at my Ford and grinned. "This truck has opinions." I said, "So do I." She laughed and said she had paperwork to drop at my shop tomorrow. Tomorrow. That's a word you don't waste. I cleaned the bay like company was coming. Sarah showed up just before closing, folder in hand, nerves hiding under a brave smile. Noah slid his step stool next to her like a gentleman and declared a lesson. "First, you loosen the lug nuts," he said, serious as a foreman. She put both hands on the wrench and pulled. Nothing. He nodded, tapped the bar, and said, "Leverage." She grunted. The nut gave with a little cry. We all laughed, me at her surprise, her at herself, Noah at the sound a stubborn thing makes when it finally moves. Older dads know this joy, watching your kid teach kindness without knowing that's what he's doing. She wiped a smear of grease across her cheek and didn't care. We ate kolaches on milk crates and talked about the Astros and broken court printers and why some victories don't trend. The shop felt warmer than the bulbs made it. When she waved goodnight, Noah whispered, "She's nice." I said, "She is." The bay door rattled shut. My heart didn't. We didn't fall fast. We built slow. Saturday mornings turned into flea markets and grocery aisles, arguing about salsa like it was policy. She learned the names of my guys, not just their titles. I learned the names of her clients' kids. She showed up to Noah's game and cheered like a cousin who never misses. I fixed her porch light. She organized our foundation files so a man could find hope without a scavenger hunt. We disagreed and stayed kind. That's grown folk love. Quiet, repeatable, tested by bad traffic and empty coffee. One night, washing dishes, she said, "You don't have to be loud to be strong." I dried my hands and knew I'd heard a vow before a vow. Older men know the moment you stop comparing and start committing. I opened a drawer, stared at a velvet box I wasn't ready to open yet, and pictured an oak tree near the edge of town, the kind that's watched weather and never bowed. We married under that oak on a clear Texas morning. No chandeliers, no string quartet, just friends from the bays and a pastor who keeps jumper cables in his trunk. Noah stood between us in a small suit and handed over the rings with hands steadier than mine. Sarah's vows weren't poetry. They were promises, honesty, loyalty, work that shows up. Mine were the same, said in a voice that surprised me by not shaking. The wind moved through the leaves like an old hymn. Someone's aunt cried. Luis from the shop dabbed his eyes and blamed pollen. We served barbecue on paper plates and laughed until my cheeks hurt. I caught Noah leaning into Sarah's side like he'd found a space that fit. Older dads know the sound of that kind of peace. It's quiet, like a porch after rain. I wasn't replacing a loss. We were starting a life. And while the world outside got louder by the week, under that tree we chose our volume. Steady. We opened Miller Trades Academy on a Tuesday morning that smelled like cut lumber and fresh coffee. No tuition, no fine print, veterans, single parents, kids who never felt welcome in lecture halls. Welding booths hummed. Diesel bays glowed under new lights. An old Marine ran orientation and said, "Show up, earn it, leave useful." I kept my speech short. I told them my best teacher was a man who handed me a wrench and expected better. Then we cut the ribbon with bolt cutters because it felt right. Sarah squeezed my hand. Noah stood in a too-big polo, grinning like he owned the place. A young mom cried when she saw the childcare room, said she hadn't been in a classroom since life got loud. I watched a kid trace his name into a steel plate and realized this school wasn't charity. It was a promise with a door. We didn't build a campus. We built ignition. Now the engine needed fuel, everywhere. We took the same spirit into neighborhoods schools forgot. The foundation patched leaking roofs so the math teacher didn't point around buckets. We stocked a library with new books that smelled like hope, stamped kids' names inside in blue ink, and watched them hold those pages like they might disappear. An older custodian shook my hand and said, "Been waiting 20 years for someone to fix that door." We rolled in carts of refurbished laptops and trained a handful of parents to keep them running. No photo op, just work boots on tile and folders labeled in Sharpie. A principal sent a note. Attendance up, suspensions down. There isn't a billboard for that, but there ought to be. Rumors grew teeth. Anonymous donor, mystery mechanic. Someone said oil money. Someone else said saints with sockets. I didn't correct a word. We weren't hunting credit. We were hunting outcomes. Still, the city hum changed pitch. And when a hum becomes a buzz, reporters follow the sound. A business journal ran, "The Quiet Billionaire of Houston," and my shop phone lit up like a dashboard at dusk. They wanted panels, dinners, roundtables where men trade cards and applause. I kept my uniform on and said I had cars to deliver. Truth is, older men know what matters. Showing up to your kid's game beats a ballroom every time. Sarah asked if staying invisible still served the mission. She was right to ask. There's a kind of giving that needs a microphone so partners know where to plug in. I told her if we ever spoke, it would be to point at classrooms and shop bays, not at me. We drafted plans for a public pledge big enough to wake the right giants: vendors, unions, school boards. At night, I stood in the academy bay, lights off, smelling steel and solvent, and decided to step into a sliver of light. Not for fame, for leverage. I called Marshall, our attorney, and picked a date. While we measured podiums and parking, Trent Carter's numbers finally told the truth. Lines of credit tightened like belts. Auditors circled. Lenders used words that cool rooms: exposure, risk, unwind. The smiles in his penthouse thinned. The elevator that once carried Amber past velvet ropes now stopped on floors she used to float by. When money leaves, so do invitations. Older folks have seen it. Holiday tables get smaller when the cards bounce. She called friends who once ordered for the table. They let it ring. The jeweler who poured champagne slid a bill across glass. The concierge's nod turned into a checklist. Trent said it was a wobble. Wobbles don't tow Escalades, but the tow truck did. The balcony view stayed pretty. The ground moved. She packed dresses into bags like she was sorting weather. Somewhere a printer spat out a notice that didn't blink. Somewhere a banker stopped using her first name. An elevator chimed. For the first time it felt like down. There's a kind of quiet that tastes like metal. Amber felt it under a flickering pawnshop sign, bracelet in her palm, clerk testing stones like he was weighing a memory. The number he offered was smaller than the story she'd told herself. She didn't argue long. Pride burns fast when rent is due. Outside, the sidewalk heat rose through thin soles. People she'd known by first name passed and glanced through her like a window. Older adults understand this part. When the room that once loved you now loves the next table. She boarded a bus with a paper bag and no destination, scrolled her phone out of habit, and caught a local Houston teaser on a mounted TV. Mechanic turned philanthropist to pledge $100 million for education at Miller Trades Academy. My face, a podium, backlit flags. Her world tilted. Not just rich, respected. Not just money, meaning. She touched the screen like it might blink. It didn't. A departure board clicked behind her. Something in her did too. I stood at a simple podium in a gym that smelled like new rubber and possibility, hands shaking more than a torque wrench ever made them. Sarah was on my right. Noah straightened my tie like a foreman. Cameras flashed. I told the truth. I was a mechanic who got lucky and decided luck should look like access. We pledged $100 million to fund scholarships, teacher stipends, equipment, and satellite bays in towns that buses skip. I asked unions to partner, companies to sponsor, churches to recruit. The applause felt less like noise and more like agreement. I didn't list donors. I listed needs. Afterward, I walked the welding line, shook hands, and promised a class full of veterans we'd have placement letters by summer. Later, Marshall said the press wanted profiles. I said they could profile the students. Somewhere in Los Angeles, in a pawn shop with buzzing lights, Amber watched the broadcast and realized what she'd traded. That night, my phone lit up. I'm in Houston. I need to see you. I need... Yeah. Later, I'd learned that while I was locking up Baytown and sweeping bolts into a dustpan, a boarding pass printed at LAX with Amber Lewis on the line that used to read my wife. She rolled a suitcase that had lived better lives, traded a penthouse elevator for a TSA line, and stared at a gate screen like it might blink out a different past. Older folks know the feeling. You buy a ticket for a destination and secretly hope it's a time machine. I fueled the Ford, called Noah about his spelling test, and told Sarah I'd be late. In Los Angeles, the intercom called Amber to board. In Houston, I killed shop lights, pocketed keys, and listened to the roof breathe after heat. Airplanes flatten distance. They can't iron regret. She crossed a sky I used to wish on. I crossed a parking lot that still smelled like work. 2 flights were moving, hers through clouds, mine toward a door I didn't know was about to knock. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while cinnamon rolls cooled and the house exhaled the kind of quiet that makes you grateful. The text glowed like a bad memory revived. I'm in Houston. I need to see you. Before I could answer, another. I'm outside the gate. In the woodlands, floodlights throw honest shadows. I pulled the curtain with 2 fingers and saw a taxi idling, exhaust curling into the live oaks like a ghost that knew the path. She stood in the beam, thinner, coat wrinkled, suitcase wheels squeaking like a confession. Sarah rinsed a bowl without asking anything yet. Noah hunched over homework, pencil tapping steady as a heartbeat. Older men know the drill. Breathe, choose your words, choose your posture. I told Sarah, I'll handle it, and she nodded, faith without fanfare. The gate hummed its low, electric warning, a line between storms and supper. I stepped onto the porch, boots remembering every mile, and started down the gravel. The iron bars put inches and years between us. Amber gripped them with both hands the way a person holds a railing when the room tilts. Makeup had made a run for it. Pride had too. "Jack, I made a mistake," she said, voice hoarse from flights and lies. "Please, she swallowed, "for our son's sake." Older dads know how that phrase tries to pick a lock in your chest. She listed losses like invoices, apartment, car, friends with short memories, and promised smaller living, better choices, whatever it took. The suitcase tipped, heels spilled, life out of order on wet gravel. I didn't gloat. I didn't preach. I stood where a husband used to stand and where a father still does. Behind me, the porch light framed Sarah in the doorway, steady as a plumb line. Inside, a pencil stopped tapping. The gate hummed. Not louder, just certain. "This isn't a courtroom," I said softly. "There's nothing to argue." She shook, reached, and used the only name she thought could open steel. "Noah." She said it like a password. The porch steps creaked and my boy came down too, Sarah's hand hovering near his shoulder without holding it. 10 years old, thin as a sapling, eyes older than any test at school. He looked at Amber through the bars, then at me, and chose his ground. His voice wasn't big, but it was built right. Straight, true, no wobble. "You're the lady from my nightmares," he said, each word laid like a plank across a gap. "Sarah is my mom." The night caught its breath. Somewhere a cicada wound down. The taxi meter ticked a small, indifferent rhythm. Amber's fingers slipped from the bars. She tried to speak, found air instead of language, and went to her knees. Older adults know this silence, the kind that changes a house without moving a chair. I stepped closer, not to comfort, not to crush, just to stand between an old storm and a boy who had finally named it. Amber's sobs scraped the quiet raw. "I don't want your money," she said, palms open like she could catch a year that blew away. "I only want my son, please." I kept my voice where Noah could lean on it. "Don't use his name as a key," I said. "Punishment isn't our work. Protection is." A security guard eased from the shadows, hat in hand, kind because this is Texas, and kindness is still currency. "Ma'am, let me call you a cab," he offered, not noticing one already waited. She stood on shaky ankles, gathered what wouldn't fit back into the past, and looked at me like a man might look at a lighthouse he ignored. The taxi door sighed. The taillights drew 2 red lines into the trees and were gone. I didn't move for a beat. Neither did the gate. Behind me, the porch light warmed the boards where my family stood. Older men know that feeling. You've held a line, but the night still asks what you'll hold next. I locked the gate and walked back to the porch where the air felt warm again. Noah's arms went first around my waist, then Sarah's hand found my shoulder, steady like a level on a beam. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and motor oil, the 2 lives I've built learning to agree. I looked at my family and understood what money can't buy. This quiet, this trust, these people who stayed when the sky went black. True wealth isn't a number. It's who holds the light while you fix what's broken. Tonight I chose protection over pride, home over history, and the next right thing over applause. Maybe the gate will hum again one day. If it does, we'll answer it with the same rules. Love first, safety always, mercy when it doesn't endanger the ones we're sworn to guard. If you were in my boots, would you open the gate? Comment, "open" or "lock," and tell me why.